I wonder if the English translation intentionally suggested an acronym, A.S.K, ask. A for ask, S for seek, and K for knock. Ask. Very clever. But I must say, today's gospel is not really about prayer as asking. It is more about prayer as a relationship, an invitation to relate with God, not as if though you were a slave before a master, but as children before a loving Father. You know what came to my mind while reflecting on this gospel was that scene in the parable of the prodigal son. Remember that part in the parable where the older brother refused to come home because his father had welcomed his younger brother in spite of all that this brother had done. And remember what he said when his father came out and tried to persuade him to come home and join the welcome party for his brother. Listen to what he said. All these years I slaved for you. I never disobeyed any of your orders. But you never gave me even a young goat to feast on with my friends. And yet, when that son of yours came back, after squandering your property with loose women, you even killed the fatted calf for him. The dialogue lines are so full of resentment. Now listen to what the father said in reply. My son, everything that I have is yours. But now we must celebrate and rejoice because your brother was dead and has come back to life. He was lost and now has been found. Take note how the older brother talked to his father. He addressed him as if he was not his father. And he spoke about his brother as if he was not his brother. In speaking this way, he practically defines himself as a slave before a master, not as a son before his father. And he defines his brother as a stranger, not as a brother, all because his brother had messed up. But take note also how the father responds. He does not ride on this resentful narrative. He does not switch to the master mode before a slave. Actually, he could have reacted to this older son. He could have said, you ingrate. In Tagalog, mas matindi, walang utang na loob. You dare to give me that attitude after all that I have done for you? Suit yourself. Stay out of my house for as long as you want. And don't you ever show your face to me again. The father doesn't react that way. He keeps his cool and remains a father to him in spite of the hurtful things that he has just uttered to his father. And take note how this son has rebuked his father and said his father has not given him even a young goat to feast on with his friends. You know, if I read between the lines, or if I may dare to articulate what is in the father's heart, he might have said, a young goat? Did you even bother to ask? Have you forgotten that you are my son, not my slave? Well, today's gospel is an invitation to see ourselves as God sees us, namely as His children, as His sons and daughters. But sadly, I think up to now many believers think of God as a vengeful, a wrathful, an angry God, a punishing God. And so Jesus says, how much more will the Father in heaven give the Holy Spirit to those who ask Him? In St. Luke's Gospel, the gift that's specified is the Holy Spirit. Because only in the Spirit can our hearts be opened so that we are enabled to respond to God as a son or a daughter before a father. The Pharisees in the time of Jesus were scandalized by Jesus, especially by His intimate reference to God. How He taught even His disciples to call God Abba, not the formal father, but the intimate dad, or the Tagalog tay. And they insisted on a remote God, the Pharisees. They insisted on dealing with God as a judge, a big eye watching, or a law enforcement agent. Some of the Pharisees who converted to Christianity remained very Pharisaical, like those we hear about in our first reading today. They contradicted Paul and managed to convince the Galatians that the only way to salvation was strict observance of the commandments. That's why Paul is very angry. I was a bit shocked or surprised the first time I read that letter, that part, where he said, "Oh, stupid Galatians." He called them stupid, I think twice or three times in the reading. And to paraphrase Paul, what he is saying is, how could you return to behaving like slaves when you have received the Spirit and have been claimed as God's beloved children? The thinking that we have to work hard to deserve God's love is the heresy that St. Paul is confronting in our first reading. It is the same mentality that Jesus is addressing in today's gospel. You don't receive the Father's gift because you deserve it or work for it. He gives it to you because He loves you. You know, the question reminds me of the song of Richard Rogers. The song says, "Do I love you because you are beautiful? Or are you beautiful because I love you?" This change of attitude about God is what conversion is about. It is okay to ask, to seek, and to knock as often as you need to. But please, do it as a son or as a daughter before your loving Father, and not as a slave before your master. Pray to God, and pray as often as you wish, but don't insult God in your prayers. Sometimes without realizing it, like the older son, we say hurtful things to God. The asking is indeed often a part of the praying, but praying is not exclusively about asking. Sometimes it is just about being there and enjoying the presence of your Father, because praying is more about entering into that relationship with God.